This is Carolina Ghost Towns, a podcast about the vanished towns and lost communities in South Carolina, North Carolina, and maybe a few other places. I'm your host, Tom Taylor. So where exactly is South Carolina's dark corner? Really? It depends on who you ask. Back before the days of interstates and urban sprawl, just about every county had its own dark corner. I found old newspaper articles that reference a dark corner for each of the counties of York, Sumter, Fairfield, Edgefield, and Greenville. An article from 1913 in the Columbia Record described one such dark corner this way, quote, "A region so remote from railroad, telegraph, and telephone that for years the scant information obtainable in regard to it came mostly from returning revenue officers," close quote. From this brief description, you can probably tell that these areas were rife with moonshining and other illegal activities. Law enforcement was sporadic, and these regions were removed from the judicial centers of the counties. The phrase dark corner was also used as a euphemism for segregated parts of these counties. Archival news reports are full of stories about revenuers finding illegal stills, violence, and just everyday reporting from these remote areas.
March 28th, 1868. Edgefield County. A most horrible murder. On the night of Wednesday, the 18th, Mrs. Elkins, a married lady living in the dark corner section of our district, was most barbarously murdered. Mrs. Elkins was still a young woman, the mother of 3 small children. We are informed that Mr. William Elkins, the husband and father, who was a maimed Confederate soldier,
November 22nd, Abbeville County. Murderous affray. It is reported that a terrible affray occurred in what is known as the Dark Corner of Abbeville County on the 17th. It appears that a Mr. Cook and 3 of the Tolberts were engaged in a settlement, but not agreeing upon the figures, words arose when Cook, thinking the odds against him too great, drew his revolver and shot one of the Tolberts
April 2nd, 1891, Transylvania County,
another.
North Carolina. Dr. Ensor, with deputies Jennings, Rourke, and King on Wednesday night of last week, made a raid in the dark corner of Transylvania County, North Carolina, and captured and destroyed an old, established illicit distillery. Dr. Ensor says it was about 35 miles from Pickens and in the darkest corner of the Blue Ridge Range, and a country where...
January 2nd, 1895, Darlington County. Kellytown, the dark corner of Darlington County, celebrated Christmas by loyally filling up on dispensary poison and killing a man.
October 22nd, 1890, Richland County. Honorable William Elliott was in town yesterday conferring with friends and looking after the campaign in the 7th District. He expresses himself much pleased with the prospects of his re-election and hopes his fellow Democrats will turn out in large numbers on Election Day. He left here for Columbia to look after the dark corner in Richland, which is also in his district.
The foothills of the Blue Ridge were especially remote, and this region across Pickens, Greenville, Spartanburg, and York districts, which include Cherokee County, became known as the primary dark corner region of the state. Eventually, this was narrowed to the area in Greenville County around Hogback and Glassy Mountains. When South Carolinians talk about the dark corner, this is usually what they mean. Today's ghost town was in the heart of the dark corner of Greenville County. Merrittsville was on the State Road, one of the main roads from South Carolina over the mountains. Now, it sits at the bottom of the Greenville Watershed. First, a word of thanks. I was given a lecture at the Berea branch of the Greenville County Library. One of the attendees was Dr. Stan Coleman, who is on the board of directors of the Travelers Rest Historical Society. The next night, while I was playing my banjo at Fireforge Craft Beer, Stan came up to me with a present, an autographed copy of Merrittsville, A Village Beneath by Mary Owens, Charlie Wilson, and James Stellick. Much of the information in this episode comes from that fantastic resource. Early settlers, whether Native American or European, looked for the easiest ways to get over the mountains. In the West, these are called passes, but in the Blue Ridge and Appalachian Mountains, these are called gaps. Some of these names live on in lore, like Cumberland Gap, Grants Pass, Donner Pass, and Newfound Gap in the Great Smoky Mountains. 4 of the main routes from the coastal Carolina settlements were Rabun Gap in Georgia, Howard Gap in western North Carolina, Jones Gap and Saluda Gap on the North Carolina-South Carolina border. Before Greenville District was open to European settlers, this was Cherokee land. Their village of Checharoa sat at the base of the Saluda Gap. The North Saluda River was then called the Checharoa, and this name even appears on Mill's 1825 atlas. By 1775, the Cherokee were no longer in the area. Some of the earliest European settlers were Benjamin Clark, John Mallon, and Ephraim and Alice Raglan Merritt. Ephraim's son, Benjamin, was a Revolutionary War veteran. He purchased land from Clark and a mill and more land from Mallon in 1784. Benjamin Merritt's children also purchased land in the area, which became known as Merrittsville, after Benjamin and his family. At Merrittsville, Colonel John Hodges purchased land from Benjamin Merritt and built a 2-story farmhouse. He and his family lived on the upper floors and operated a tavern and inn on the lower floors. Travelers on the old road from Greenville to Asheville would stop at Hodges' Tavern. Travel through the Saluda Gap wasn't easy. Bishop Francis Asbury, while spreading Methodism through the area, came through several times in 1800 and described his visits in his journal.
Friday, November 14th, 1800. We had no small labor in getting down Saluda Mountain, arriving at Father Douthat's on the south branch of the Saluda, where finding myself quite at home. Tuesday, September 13th, 1801. We came down Saluda River near Saluda Mountain. It tried my lame feet and old feeble joints. Wednesday, November 10th, 1802. Saluda Mountain exceeds all I know from the province of Maine to Kentucky in Cumberland. I had dreaded it, fearing I should not be able to walk or ride such steeps. Nevertheless, with time, patience, labor, 2 sticks, and above all, a good providence, I came at 5 o'clock to ancient Father John Douthat's in Greenville County, South Carolina. Thursday, October 20th, 1803. I walked down the Table Rock Mountain after riding 16 or 18 miles before breakfast and came in about 12 o'clock to Father John Douthat's once more. I have escaped from filth, fleas, rattlesnakes, hills, mountains, rocks, and rivers.
The first official road over Saluda Gap was built in the 1700s. According to historian Dr. A.V. Huff, quote, "The South Carolina legislature collected $2,000 for the construction of this road and stipulated that it had to be wide enough for 4 horses to pull a wagon load of 1 ton. Elias Earle and John William Gowan completed the road between 1794 and 1797. It initially connected Greenville and Asheville, but was eventually extended to Knoxville. This road went through the Saluda Gap, but was so narrow that 2 wagons could not pass each other at the same time. There were also precipitous drops of 100 feet right off the edge of the road." Close quote. The road became known as the Buncombe Road, a name for roads that still exist in Greenville and in Asheville today. The late historian Mann Batson described how drovers moved livestock along the old Buncombe Road.
In the fall of the year, they would begin to round up their cattle and move them to the markets and to the seaports. And of course, this road was a conduit for that type of traffic. And so, ordinary drove of hogs could run anywhere from 200 to 500 or 600 head of hogs in a drove. And they came on foot. And of course, they had to have, I don't know, we'll say 8 or 10 drovers, men, who sometimes on horseback, sometimes on foot, kept those hogs in the road and kept them moving. And they moved a drove of hogs would move about 8 or 10 miles in a day. Therefore, all up and down this road, there had to be places to accommodate this stock, because you could not bring the feed with them, transport the feed, because the animals were transporting themselves. They usually brought a wagon with a few things in a wagon, so a business developed up and down the road, the state road, and other roads as well, was called drovers' stands. In other words, the men would build a bunch of lots out of rails to start with, enclosures. So if you came in there with 400 head of hogs late in the day after about 8 or 10 miles, and going to stay at his drover stand, you would drive your hogs into one of these compartments that was fenced off and buy the feed to feed those hogs from him, so you could move on the next day. They not only drove hogs, they drove cattle the same way, herds of cattle, and they were handled in the same way. They drove sheep down the road the same way. They drove turkeys on foot. They were the most contentious of all. They could hardly control the turkeys, but sometimes they wouldn't get to a drover stand. They would decide, they'd fly up in the trees on the side of the road and decide where they were going to spend the night.
In the early 1800s, there were petitions to improve the road over the Saluda Gap. The state road from Charleston to Columbia had been completed, and the legislature authorized the completion of the road through Saluda Gap. Joel Poinsett and Abram Blanding were tasked with completing the road, with Blanding taking on most of the work. By 1820, the new road was complete, with major improvements. There were now 3 stone bridges across waterways in the Merrittsville area. A bridge with a Gothic arch over Gap Creek, a double-barreled arched bridge over the North Saluda, and a smaller barrel arch over Congaree Creek. This last one was a covered bridge. All 3 of these bridges sat on property owned by Colonel John Hodges. Mann Batson described these bridges.
Sitting below what is known as the Poinsett Bridge was constructed in 1820 on the state road. The state road ran from Charleston, South Carolina to the Saluda Gap on the North Carolina-South Carolina line. And this was the super highway of that day. That's what it was built for, to draw the traffic and trade out of the western North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, and all that area into Charleston, or through this section of the country. And so Poinsett envisioned the bridge, and he got on a committee that was appointed to do the construction of this work. There were 3 bridges, 2 others in addition to this. One is over on the North Saluda River. And this bridge had 2 elliptical arches. And this bridge collapsed sometimes. Something happened to it, and a friend of mine who had lived in this area for all of his life and for several generations told me that the bridge had collapsed. But After 1900, this man came through here making a survey to determine what effect the cotton mills or the textile mills in Greenville and around had on the mountain people where they'd migrated out. And so he came down to about North Fort Church to where the Hodges family generally lived. And there he spent the night with one of the Hodges. He was on his way to the Dark Corner. The next morning, Mr. Hodges, he says in his book, directed him to the Dark Corner across a stone bridge, an arch of which had collapsed. So it had been replaced with timber, so we know that one of the arches on the bridge collapsed before the rest of them. Then moving on up the road, as far as bridges is concerned, when you get up to a place called Merrittsville, that's up toward the North Carolina line in Saluda Gap, there was a bridge, a smaller bridge there that had a circular arch. And that was near this little village called Merrittsville, which no longer exists. It's now in the watershed.
Little Merrittsville now sat at the junction of two major roads, the Buncombe Road and the State Road. Not far south of Merrittsville, the State Road connected with the Blackstock Road, the main route to Spartanburg. Merrittsville thrived as a stopover for travelers and drovers. The village featured a grist mill, sawmill, store, tanyard, blacksmith shop, slaughter pen, camp out, and lots for drovers and a post office. There was a school, and the North Fork Baptist Church served the area. North of the village, there was a toll booth at the base of the Wines, leading up over the Saluda Mountain. According to the book Merrittsville, A Village Beneath, quote, the 64-mile trip from Greenville to Asheville by stage took 17 hours and cost $5 over twisting mountain roads. Frequent stops were needed by the passengers to rest the stage horses. Close quote. Even with this increased traffic, the region took on the moniker Dark Corner. There were several conflicting stories as to how the area got its name. The late historian Dean Campbell was known as the Squire of the Dark Corner and gave his perspective on the name.
The most often told tale happened after the war between the states. In the 1860s, we had a politician come out of Greenville up to the old muster grounds on Dill Road in the Dark Corner area. And he was to give a speech, so they had a cart so he could stand above the people and speak. And they weighted down the shafts of the cart with some sandbags. Well, evidently he said something unpopular with some of the young men in the crowd, so they took away the sandbags and they dumped him in the ground. Well, he got up, dusted himself off, and as if to say, you hicks, he said, you people up here in the dark, you don't know what's going on. So when he went back to Greenville and told the story, they asked, well, where did this happen? And he said, up in the corner of the county. So that's how it was known for many years as the Dark Corner. However, we discovered, we meaning about 6 of us who were researchers, Mann, Batson, and McEwen, and people like this, we discovered a couple of deeds that went back to 1830s. And in those deeds, in describing the property, it would say, in that portion of Greenville County, commonly referred to as the Dark Corner. So suddenly we realized the Dark Corner was named that well before the 1860s. And then we had the governor come up and was giving a talk at Glassy Mountain Baptist Church in the later part of the century. And he said to the people, do you know how you got your name? And they said, well, yes, this politician. He said, oh, no, you got your name in 1832, when we had the Nullification Act of 1832 here in South Carolina. As you know, we had a vote taken in the state that year because some tariffs had been passed by Congress that were not good for the southern states. And so we elected by states to nullify certain things from the Congress. We can still do that. They're doing it today. And so when the vote was taken, though, in the state of South Carolina, 82% of our people in the state voted yes, let's nullify. But in the dark corner, it was called Mason's Box in those days, and when the vote was taken, the vote was 169 to 1 against nullification.
By the mid-1800s, railroads began to replace stagecoach travel, and traffic on the state road began to decline. Merrittsville took on more of those dark corner characteristics, with reports of moonshining and mayhem ongoing in the hills surrounding the village. There were tales of cockfighting, duels, horse racing, and feuds between rival bootleggers. As for moonshining, Billy Center, a resident of the area, described the process as follows.
One first got corn, either yellow or white corn, shucked and shelled it, took it to the mill and had it ground. A hogshead containing about 25 gallons of water from the spring was put over a fire, and when the water was hot, you put in 1.5 bushels of the cornmeal. The cornmeal was stirred for a long time with a stick until it cooked up almost like cornbread batter. The cooked cornmeal, called mash, was left overnight. The next day, malt or yeast was added to the mash. Malt was sprouted barley, and 5 or 6 pounds was needed for a batch. This mix was allowed to work, or ferment, for about 2 days. The mix was then called still beer. The still beer was put into a copper still, sitting on a large flat stone under which a fire was burning. A stone oven was built around the still to keep the temperature of the mixture high enough for the mash to distill through the cap and worm coil of the still. The distilled liquid ran into a funnel filled with charcoal and then into a wooden keg. The complete distillage process would take about 1.5 hours for a batch.
Just as an aside, I have a good friend, whom I will not identify, who makes some righteous smooth moonshine. He said he prefers white corn and uses the whole ear. He shucks the corn, but puts the kernels and the cob into the mash. He says that the cob contains just as much sugar as the kernels, and that it all gets filtered out in the distillation process. But back to the dark corner. Even the boundaries of the dark corner were in dispute. It was said that if you asked one of the locals where the dark corner was, they would always say that it was, quote, on up the road a piece, close quote. One opinion was that this was so as to never reveal its true location to a possible revenuer. Merrittsville is now underwater, truly a village beneath. All of the attractions once associated with the village that weren't inundated, such as the Wines, Big Falls, and Wildwood Park, are on Greenville Watershed land and are inaccessible. Old US 25 runs through the watershed on its way up to Tuxedo and Saluda, North Carolina. Along the way, you can catch glimpses of the reservoir surrounded by low hills. Every time I drive up that way, I wish I could launch a kayak and paddle up to Big Falls and enjoy the pristine waters and scenery, but that will never happen. It's all off limits. However, I visited lots of places, and I have to say that Greenville water is some of the best I've ever tasted. As much as I hate that a people and a culture were displaced, I'd really hate for anything to corrupt that watershed. You can still see some vestiges of the old state road. The bridge with a Gothic arch over Little Gap Creek, which is now known as Callahan Creek, still stands as the oldest bridge in South Carolina. The Poinsett Bridge, as it is now known, is on the National Register of Historic Places and is a part of the Poinsett Bridge Heritage Preserve. Another smaller bridge with a stone arch was relocated from Merrittsville to Cleveland Park in Greenville, where it now serves as a footpath bridge and is part of the Swamp Rabbit Trail. With its lore of moonshining and mystery, the Dark Corner has become even more popular. Multi-million-dollar homes now sit atop Glassy Mountain, overlooking the watershed and Piedmont areas. Some wear the term Dark Corner as a badge of honor, celebrating its outlaw nature. You can get Dark Corner t-shirts and hats, and even visit several legitimate distilleries in the Greenville area, including the Dark Corner Distillery, located not in the Dark Corner itself, but in downtown Greenville. Yet, there are those like historians Ann Blythe, Ann McEwen, and A.V. Huff, and the late Mann Batson and late Dean Campbell that keep the memory of the Dark Corner as it was alive. My thanks to Dr. Stan Coleman for the gift of the book, Merrittsville, A Village Beneath. It has many, many more details about everyday life, residents of the North Saluda Valley, its churches and schools, and information about illicit activities in the area. Also useful was an archaeology report on the area for the National Register of Historic Places. I'll put a link to these and other resources in the show notes. To take us out this week, here's Let Me Live Out My Days in the Dark Corner, written by Carol Gibson and performed by Jacob Johnson. Thanks for listening.
Glassy Mountain born, Glassy Mountain raised. They'll lay my body down in a Glassy Mountain grave. The feuding days have faded, but there's moonshine in my veins. Let me live out my days in Dark Corner. Let me live out my days in Dark Corner. Grandpa had a cornfield out near Old Mountain Hill. Pappy planted cotton and worked in the Slater mill. Back up in the woods I know they had a moonshine still, just like our neighbors over in the holler. Let me live out my days in Dark Corner. I never knew a day when I felt I needed more. With a cabin and some land, how could anyone feel poor? A smokehouse full of ham, blue tick hound outside the door, and a well giving good drinking water. Let me live out my days in Dark Corner. In summer morning, Grandma filled our cellar to the brim with jars of garden labor stacked together rim to rim. They'd last us through the winter, and in spring we'd start again. Plant our garden when the weather turned warmer. Let me live out my days in Dark Corner. I never knew a day when I felt I needed more. With a cabin and some land, how could anyone feel poor? A neighbor round the bend who would help us with a chore, and a good healthy cow for milk and butter. Let me live out my days in Dark Corner. Love the old-time ways of Dark Corner. Let me live out my days in Dark Corner.
In this southern ghost town, we found a story untold. In the shadows of the past, we unravel, secrets unfold. With each step we take, we journey back in time. In this southern ghost town, we leave our footprints behind.
Thanks for listening. The opening music was composed by Lex FM with additional music from Pixabay. The song Southern Ghost Town was generated by Suno AI. All other music was composed and recorded by me, Tom Taylor. Carolina Ghost Towns is a part of the Random Connections empire. It's pretty much a one-man show, so I wear all the hats, including producer, writer, researcher, sound engineer, publicist, and bartender. If you like the show, please subscribe on your favorite pod venue and be sure to give us feedback. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for the show, you can reach me at carolinaghosttownspod@gmail.com. For more information and show notes, visit randomconnections.com. Thank you.
In this southern ghost town, we found a story untold. In the shadows of the past, we unravel, secrets unfold. With each step we take, we journey back in time. In this southern ghost town, we leave our footprints behind.